Hello and welcome to Books Up Close. I'm Chris Lloyd. This is the close reading show for writers, readers, and language nerds. In today's spooky Halloween special, I talk to Dr. Kaja Franck about the classic 1897 novel Dracula by Bram Stoker. Kaja is a lecturer in English literature at the University of Hertfordshire, along with me. We're colleagues, we're friends. Her research centres on monsters and monstrous animals. She has previously published on the depiction of werewolves in Dracula, the Canadian Gothic and YA fiction, alongside organising international conferences on werewolves, vampires and faeries in literature and popular culture. Her monograph, the Ecogothic Werewolf in Literature, emerged panting into the wild this year and has a beautiful cover, so go look it up. Welcome, Kaja.
Hello, Chris, and thank you so much for having me. And yes, we are friends. And I think this is always so fun because I think it's just a great example of the fact that we have some overlaps in what we study, but I'd say broadly speaking, we come at things from a very different angle and have really different interests, both in terms of what we read ourselves. I wouldn't recommend a book necessarily to you, and I think vice versa.
Yes, but also sometimes when you're so consumed with work, we don't really get lots of time just to sit down and talk about texts, which is kind of what we love doing. So this is a nice opportunity to do that on the airwaves, and Kaja is the person I will go to if I want to ask questions about vampires and horror things and gothic things. So I'm excited to have you talk about Dracula, which is a book I haven't gone back to in a really, really long time. So much so that even I opened the first couple of chapters and I don't remember it very well. Like, I know kind of spin-offs, I know all of the kind of texts that have proliferated from it, but I thought it would be nice to actually go back to it properly here. We're going to close read an extract from the end of chapter 3, so really early in the book, and we'll talk you through that in a minute, dear listeners. But before we go there, Kaja, you know the show, but like, how do you feel about close reading as an activity and a practice?
Oh, it's the fundamental aspect of my practice. I think that's a really nice, this is exactly what you wanted to hear, but it's absolutely the case. I've always enjoyed reading. I've always enjoyed language. My mum in particular, she worked in the library service, and she loved language, and we would sit and we would read out everything. So we'd go in and we'd double check Leviticus for the rules. And we're not a religious family, but my mum was very much like, it's really good to have as many religious texts in the household as possible. So we had to like copies of the Quran, the Bhagavad Gita and things like that. And we'd flick through them. This makes me sound so middle class, which I am, so fair. So when we weren't reading The Guardian and eating brown rice and lentils, all of which we did, we were, yeah, I think it was always, well, let's go back to the book, let's have a look what it's being said. And my mum read to me every night when I was a child. She read the whole of The Lord of the Rings to me. It took a year. And so again, that idea of hearing things out loud, we would read poetry to one another. I sound like I'm from the 1950s, but we would read poetry. She'd help me memorize poetry and talk about pacing and things like that. So from an early age, I just enjoyed language, and it would make sense that I'd go on to study it. And then when I got to university, I always read the book first. I was not the person who'd read the secondary reading so that I could then like make things up in class. I would read the book or just not do the reading if I was feeling particularly lazy. But it would always be like the text was the thing that I thought was important. And then finally, I think the biggest thing was when I had this feeling in my gut that I didn't like what I call detective reading, which is where we used the author to solve the text. And that the idea would be somehow like there was one final reading, and if we could just know everything about the author, it would explain the text. I don't know why, but intrinsically I found that kind of a bit like it would make me feel kind of hemmed in, and it would make me feel like I didn't feel like I was having a relationship with what I was reading. And so when we were doing theory, of course, you come to Roland Barthes, and I know there are critiques of Roland Barthes, and what have you. But what I liked about Roland Barthes, and I read some of his other stuff, was he always felt quite tongue-in-cheek and a bit naughty to me. Like he was saying things to be provocative. And this amused me because I do exactly the same thing. And like Chris, you know this all too well. But also when I read that line, like the author is dead, and I was given permission, and I was told like that was a valid way of reason. I think it was reading. It was one of the most significant things in terms of my career, I'd say.
Amazing. And yes, we've taught a module together about close reading, and we've taught the Barthes essay, which listeners, you've heard me bang on about before. And part of me wants to maybe contextualize this extract, but I think actually if we dive in, start doing stuff with the language, and then maybe if you need to like contextualize anything, you can. Because actually it's good to go back to these canonical texts and see what they're actually about and saying, right? When you go to Frankenstein, for example, most people haven't like read that or like read it in a long time. When you read it, you're like, this is not the thing that is conjured up when people think of Frankenstein or Frankenstein's monster, right? And I think Dracula's the same in that regard. So we're going to read a bit from like near the end of chapter 3. Would you read the extract for us, please?
Absolutely. I was afraid to raise my eyelids, but looked out and saw perfectly under the lashes. The girl went on her knees and bent over me, simply gloating. There was a deliberate voluptuousness which was both thrilling and repulsive, and as she arched her neck, she actually licked her lips like an animal, till I could see in the moonlight the moisture shining on the scarlet lips and on the red tongue as it lapped the white sharp teeth. Lower and lower went her head as the lips went below the range of my mouth and chin, and seemed about to fasten on my throat. Then she paused, and I could hear the churning sound of her tongue as it licked her teeth and lips, and could feel the hot breath on my neck. Then the skin on my throat began to tingle, as one's flesh does when the hand that is to tickle it approaches nearer, nearer. I could feel the soft, shivering touch of the lips on the super-sensitive skin of my throat, and the hard dents of two sharp teeth, just touching and pausing there. I closed my eyes in languorous ecstasy and waited with beating heart. But at that instant, another sensation swept through me as quick as lightning. I was conscious of the presence of the Count, and of his being as if I lapped in a storm of fury. As my eyes opened involuntarily, I saw his strong hand grasp the slender neck of the fair woman, and with giant's power draw it back, the blue eyes transformed with fury, the white teeth champing with rage, and the fair cheeks blazing with red with passion. But the Count, never did I imagine such wrath and fury, even to the demons of the pit. His eyes were positively blazing. The red light in them was lurid, as if the flames of hellfire blazed behind them.
Amazing. This passage goes on a little bit further, but I thought we better stop, otherwise there'll probably be too much to talk about. This is like very early on for such like wild scenes, right? Like I feel like if you read this out of context, if I didn't tell you this was in chapter 3, you might imagine this is like late in the narrative, right? Like this is like this real build up towards like these scenes of, I don't know, the biting, the sexuality, the like the terror. I don't know, but we're going full throat from like early on in the book, which is quite fascinating. This extract begins like, I was afraid to raise my eyelids. And I did a search on Project Gutenberg earlier on like the text, and I was afraid comes up so many times, right? Because he's writing these letters, right? Like the book is in these like letter forms, but like I was afraid too. Like comes, I don't know, it is just the language of like the horror, right? Of the Gothic novel. Just like that fear is dominant, but like they're always just saying it like I'm afraid.
Absolutely. And the thing why I love this particular section, so I chose this very specifically because in my first year of university, I did actually do one linguistics module.
Mm,
And I chose the section before they mention, so I stopped when they start mentioning the Count so that I completely decontextualize it.
mm,
So if you don't know where it's from, and I gave it to my like my friends who were on the same hallway as me. So most of them weren't literature scholars, but I said, just read this. Tell me, what kind of book do you think this is from? And they all said, oh, it's from like a Mills and Boone, isn't it? It's from something sexy, isn't it? Because like she's on her
mm,
knees, and the language, and they talk about like the licking of the lips, and like it's somewhere between desire
mm,
and repulsiveness, and we're thinking a lot about it. It's very oral, there's a lot of orality there, and then ideas of shivering, and then the use of colors, deliberate voluptuousness. They were like, this language is the language of Mills and Boone. I was like, no, this is from Dracula from 1897. And they were like, no. And I
mm,
actually wrote an entire essay using this, simply talking about how it uses language
mm,
and how we associate certain languages, certain genres. So it's really significant to me. I've then also used it in now when I teach, and I do a version of it. And again, I don't tell my students, and then I edit huge amounts of it out. So it is very factual, like this happened, this happened, this happened. And then we talk about the effect of how simply bringing in certain types of words, choosing red, why red, what does red symbolize, talking about white, talking about skin, using things like longer sentences, shorter sentences, and playing with pacing, how you can kind of bring that sense of anticipation, to sound very Rocky Horror, making you shiver with anticipation. So yeah, it's I think it's important because of that, and I think it does highlight one of the things that we forget about the original text is that it has huge amounts of really quite overtly erotic and sensual content in it, but not where you'd expect it to be, and sometimes in ways that I think makes us understand why Dracula is so inherently a queer text, and I mean that in the whole range of what queer could mean.
Yeah. The tactility, as you're saying, about like of the text, like eyelids, lashes, knees, neck, lips, like it's non-stop, right? This attention to the body. And yes, I think we know that like the Gothic and horror are like body attentive, but it's remarkable to see how consistently it is through this extract. Like every single sentence is mentioning something about the body, right? It's really rooted in the flesh. And I think that's always like useful to note. And even there was a deliberate voluptuousness, which was both thrilling and repulsive. I've been thinking about deliberate voluptuousness for like a couple of days now. Like, how is one deliberately voluptuous? Like, this kind of performance of voluptuousness, I guess, but also voluptuousness is like a bodily being, right? It's not like a performance. So there's something really interesting there about like that choice of words. Maybe they just sound good next to each other, right? They are like quite thick in the mouth, right, to say, which is both thrilling and repulsive. And as she arched her neck, she actually licked her lips like an animal till like like the sentence goes on and on. He's using very rich language to kind of play a little bit. Like, he's playful.
Yeah, and I think it's worth remembering. So it's worth remembering that at the time, you can look at the reviews from the time. People weren't like, "Wow, this is a superb piece of art, and this is the most literary thing that's ever been written." They were like, "This is, yeah, okay, this is kind of it does what it does. It's a bit schlocky." They knew it was genre fiction at the time and that it was
Mm,
popular fiction. And I think people forget that, like, whilst we treat Dracula the novel now as like this really important literary text, in reality, that wasn't really until the 1960s that people really treated it as a text that was worthy of research. And that started with Sir Christopher Frayling and his work. And that's really when people started saying, well, realizing that actually he'd done quite a lot of research, that this wasn't just invented off the top of his head, that we can find where he's been making notes and planning and so forth. So it makes sense that when we read it now, we can see that that aspect of it is coming through. And I love popular fiction, and I if someone tells me something's badly written, I'm gonna read it. I'm
yeah.
gonna have to. So that's no problem, I think. But yeah, it's maximalism. It's literary
Yes.
maximalism. It's the purple prose we see picked up in Angela Carter, and Angela Carter's writing is absolutely playing with
Yeah.
this to the nth degree. But you have to have something like Dracula being written. The other thing is when you read it out, I am interested that I would say this is a text that when you read it out, you benefit a lot more from
Yeah.
it. So things like moonlight, the moisture, you get the m, and then you get lots of l sounds, and that's quite a languid feeling in your mouth, and lots of ch and sh. And so you're getting lots of sibilance in there, and alliteration. And you also feel that when you're reading out loud, the grammar, the punctuation, how it's structured is forcing you to feel that pacing within your body. And there was more of a tradition of reading text out
Mm,
loud, and I think the very structure. Dracula is has got elements where it's letters and elements where it's recordings and diary entries. It's epistolary overall, but I think it is designed to have that personal quality. Hence, again, I think many of us forget that most of it's in first person.
yeah. Should have said that at the beginning. Like the first person is, and this is also like Frankenstein, right? The kind of like the narrative within the narrative. You get like the I voice that really grounds it in in the experience as it's happening, right? The kind of like, well, obviously he's recounting it afterwards. you're feeling the things happening slowly, right? She arched her neck. She actually licked her lips like an animal. I love that, actually. You know when people say, like, oh, literally, like people say literally now to mean not what it means, but it's like actually licked her lips like an animal, till I could see in the moonlight the moisture shining on the scarlet lips and on the red tongue as it lapped the white sharp teeth. Okay, this is like hilarious, but like scarlet lips and red tongue. I like that he kind of like differentiates the two. And then white sharp teeth. This is the one thing that I get mocked for, right? When people know I do literature, is they're like, oh, do you always just talk about how the curtains are blue? You know, it's melancholy and like how the walls are. And I was like, yes, we do. But also, there's no avoiding the fact that he is using color as a range of signifiers here, right? There's more colors later on. There's more red, there's more white, but this red, white, red, white, red, white, which obviously conjures up, you know, both purity and like danger. But I feel like he's also playing with them a bit more than that, though, right? The fact that they're scarlet lips, like, and all those kinds of things conjure up, right? But the red tongue, like that's more like devilish, right? Or that there's something beyond just like sexuality. There's like other kinds, and the white sharp teeth, also like those like really crisp syllables in there, right? Like white sharp teeth, as you were saying.
And it's so significant given that if we think about the impact that this had in terms of how we conceive of the vampire, like
Mm.
he's essentially laying down the blueprint. Now, my research also looks at like the werewolf aspects and the wolfish aspects, and I could go on
Ah.
forever. And that's why things like talking about animal and red tongue, I also see
Mm.
that as we can be looking at sort of animal traits in there, the non-human, the subhuman.
Yeah.
The other thing I'm interested because when you said the deliberate voluptuousness, well, how are you deliberately voluptuous? Well, these are meant to be, so it's three vampiresses who are about to attack Harker, and one of them is this blonde-haired bombshell. Basically, your Ingrid Pitts of your Hammer horror, what's going to be picked up. So all these different types of elements are then
Mm.
picked up in different adaptations. So yes, that's there. But I think the other thing is we're meant to be, I assume that we're not meant to be like, wow, this is awesome. He's about to have, well, I guess a foursome. This is going to be so cool. There's these hot ladies, they're going to bite him. No, Harker is very much the gothic heroine here. He's quite passive. He's lying, he's not doing anything, he's looking under his
Mm.
lashes. In some ways, the reason why they're scary is because they're being the aggressive, animalistic, more masculine ones. And so they are deliberately voluptuous because of course they would be, because they're naughty harlot scarlet ladies, they're bad women. And I think that's interesting because depending on when you're reading it, I read it now and I see a lot of sexuality and desire. I see some elements of like, is Harker secretly enjoying being passive? Does he want to be like in some ways made to be the object? And actually on some levels he just can't admit this desire because that's how I read, and that's what we see. That's what I love about it. And I think this is why we see this sort of elements of different types of queerness, not to mention because then later the Count comes in. And this is the famous scene where he says, "This man belongs to me."
Mm-hmm.
The line that basically led to an entire way of reading the text through a queer lens,
Yep.
pretty much. And I feel like this is a text where there are just these lines where it's like, and that's the basis for how we're going to apply an entire theoretical approach to an entire novel. Because so often there are areas in this where you're like, I can just close read this and I can close read that and I can close read that.
Yeah, like attending to the language is like, well, you can't really hide from this, right? Because it's right there. It's not just an association. Like lower and lower went her head as the lips went below the range of my mouth and chin and seemed about to fasten. You're like, whoa, okay, what's happening right now? Very sexual, but also the repetition, right? He starts to amp up the repetition in this mid bit. Lower, lower, below. And then he does the and right, which I don't know, just this amping up of like details accruing, right? It's like one thing and another thing and another thing. You might call this parataxis in literary terms, right? Where rather than joining things together with commas, you're joining with the and, which has a it's the kind of is again it's the excess, I think, for me, right? It's just like one thing after another. And you could read it and it's kind of like sexy and seemed about to fasten on my throat. Like then she paused and I could like he's doing nothing, as you say, right? He's not flinching, he's not like moving, he's not saying no, please stop. Like he's just letting it happen. Then she paused and I could hear the churning sound of her tongue as it licked her teeth and lips. The churning sound of her tongue. I don't even know what that's like, doesn't make any sense, but it's fantastic.
Please, dear listener, go, and in your private moments, see if you can make a churning sound with your tongue. Record it, sending it to Chris. I'm sure he would love that. Um, yeah, and then you start seeing that. Then that's when you start removing the and then we get like nearer, nearer, weighted, and we get this sort of, oh, it's condensing, and then you get like a new paragraph, but that instant, and we get a slice through.
Yep.
And when I do talk to my students about things like when they're doing creative writing, I always say, like, please be careful with using things like suddenly and but, because you're letting us know something's about to happen. So if you think about, do you want us to know as the reader? Do you want me to be like, oh, I'm prepared, or do you not? And I think this is a great example of, I feel like sometimes I look at these sort of texts, I'm like, if a student submitted this to me, I'd be like, no, no. But I have to say to my students, because at this point it's really, really cliched. What Stoker's doing, there's plenty of cliche in there, and it does fit within in a wider remit. But what he's doing in terms of actually how insignificant this text has been in on culture and adaptation and what have you, well, aim high, kids, but I would say that just please stop putting suddenly and but. In this case, that but does work, I would argue, because we are about to have a sudden shift from this moment of languorous ecstasy where we are waiting with bated breath alongside Jonathan Harker to the Count comes in and, well, not to sound too Freudian, but daddy is home. It is giving daddy energy.
But yeah, you're right. Like the turn of like the language, like even before that paragraph break, the skin of my throat began to tingle as one's flesh does when the hand that is to tickle it approaches near. Like to tickle it, I could feel a soft shivering touch of the lips on the super sensitive skin. Like all that S alliteration is like non-stop, and the hard dents of two sharp teeth just touching and pausing there. Even that, right? He's the pausing there, like it feels quite cinematic, right? This kind of writing, it's like very, like we've gone from the wide shot like right up to this like close up of the teeth on the thing, and it's pausing and we're kind of waiting, and there's this suspension, you know, how your flesh feels as a hand is about to tickle it. You know, it hasn't actually started tickling, it's the kind of anticipation. It's which is sexual, but it is also like there's something about the language here that is saying anticipation is the name of the game for the Gothic and the horror, right? Like
Yes.
the emergence of the monster is like part of the deal, but actually it's the anticipation that is the thing that is terrifying, right? Like the when you finally see what the monster is, you're like, okay, well at least I can see it now. Whereas the kind of the build up is like really where most of the terror comes from, right? The kind of what's about to happen. I closed my eyes in languorous ecstasy and waited with beating heart. But at that instant, like it kind of cuts through in a comic way, but as well as a like it kind of does destroy the tension that has been built up in a way that is both a new kind of tension, right? Because another sensation swept through me as quick as lightning. Like we've moved to a different territory, but also like yeah, it just breaks that moment that is frustrating.
And I noticed there's always like there is, you've got this break, and I think you're absolutely right. And I won't bore listeners with too much analysis of like terror and the sublime and the gothic, and where how different people have seen like a massive differentiation between gothic and horror, and how people have seen overlap. It's yeah, but I think the thing that is important there is that notion, as you said, of not showing the monster. And that's a rule that we still have today. I love shark horror, and Jaws is an excellent example of not showing the monster, partly because the monster kept breaking in the salt water, so they couldn't use it. But it ended up being more effective because of that. And you're right as well that it's cinematic. And I always wonder whether is the reason why this has been so adapted because it already has that inside, it already has that language in there. It's very visual. We talk about the aesthetic of the Gothic. We've spoken about this color palette that's already popped in. As we read it, I can't help thinking like which came first. Did we watch films with vampires in and know that you have that shot to get up to the neck being bitten? Or is that actually coming from the book and then we're reading it back into this sort of cycle? And I also like that weighted with beating heart, but at that instant, kind of a similar balance.
Mm.
And so you've got these two clauses one at the end, one at the beginning, and they sort of mirror one another in terms of leading to that break of the waiting and then the softness of all the susurration of the before it. I just love close reading. This is so much fun.
Yeah, you're right. And the other turn that happens here then is like at that instant, another sensation swept through me as quick as lightning. So it's like the metaphor now of weather, because in the next sentence, I was conscious of the presence of the Count and of his being as if lapped in a storm of fury, right? So we've got lightning, we've got storms. Again, it's like he's just like placing down all of the like the archetypes and the imagery of this genre, right? Like, give me lightning, give me storms, give me.
I mean, it's giving pathetic fallacy.
Yeah.
Like, I know not in the truest sense, but it
No,
is.
no.
It's utilizing those pre-existing structures there, and I think again we've had this slow. We start seeing the sentences shorten in the section when the count arrives. We start seeing like quick as lightning, storm of fury, then fury again with the blue eyes transform. But again, it's interesting we're talking about blue eyes now because blue eyes suggests that flash of lightning. So we
Mm,
think of lightning often in pale blue, and we think of it as whites as well. So suddenly we're moving. You could argue as well that I would say that visually, in some ways, like white teeth have a slightly jagged quality to them. And you see that again with that notion of the lightning coming
yeah,
through.
yeah.
And again, red is now something different. Whereas before it was probably more to do with the sensual, and now red is the demonic. It is lurid. It is flame, and it is of violence suddenly. And so we get the two sides of that kind of terror and sublimity, that pleasure pain dynamic, and it just switches on an instance, which is essentially what some of the fundamental aspects of the Gothic are about. You just suddenly blazing.
Yeah. I mean,
Blazing
like
comes up a lot.
the thrilling and repulsive of the voluptuousness, right? Like it's something that we both like desire and want to push away, right? Like that's all of the tensions and contradictions, right? Of psychoanalysis, like the thing you want and want to push away at the same time. But here, as you say, there's the idea of like being conscious of the presence of the Count, right? He can't see him, he can just like feel him. Sensation again, right? The body, the affect is present, if not seeing him. Like, how powerful is this Count if you can just feel him near? So we've moved away from the body to just like presence, which again is like a real part of this like fear making of the feeling of the passage. And as my eyes opened involuntarily, he can't but like that is the passive, isn't it?
Very passive. Jonathan Harker is incredibly sort of like, in many ways, sort of, I really see him as the heroine
Yeah.
in this. He's not particularly active at any point. And his wife, or soon to be wife, Mina, ends up being the far more active one in many ways. What I've also noticed as well, though, is that when the Count comes, we then get a switch because then he becomes like the the most strong in there. So before we've got Harker, who's the victim of this female vampire who's being
Yeah.
a little bit like taking on a masculine role, and then in comes the Count, and notably this imagined hand that tickles becomes the real hand of the Count that grasps the neck
Mm,
of the woman with a giant's power. So this like hand that was soft and sensitive and going to tickle is now the hand that is, yeah, it's got this strength back. And I think that's again a very interesting balance of the imagery there as we
mm,
move from that anticipation and then to the, again, it's not tickling, it's grabbing.
yeah. And even as you're saying this, I'm like noticing like the language gets very short too. Eyes saw, strong hand, grasp, slender neck, fair woman, giant's power, draw it. Like almost all monosyllables, right? Like given the languorous ecstasy and weight, like the language is real stripped back as the intensity is building. But the Count, exclamation mark. We love an exclamation mark. Oh my god! Never did I imagine such wrath and fury, even to the demons of the pit. Like this is real strong. His eyes were positively blazing. Again, we've had blazing twice, like in two sentences. Like the
Yeah.
cheeks are blazing, his eyes are blazing. The red light in them was lurid, as if the flames of hellfire blazed behind them. Like, how many blazes do you want in three sentences? That's very, like, again, you would strike those out, right? If you saw this in someone else's writing, you'd be like, you probably could pick another word other than blazing, but the blaze is just so fulsome, right? I feel like Stoker's just like going this, right? He's just like, I'm going to pick this word, I'm just going to keep using it, I'm going to really amp this up so that we're at like a 10, right? Like, it's hard to come down from that 10, but everything has to be up here now because we're talking about like the devil, we're talking about hell, we're talking about like the worst possible imagined thing. So yeah, it's just full throated, the language and everything.
I think what's again wise because it does. You said like this is in chapter 3, and it's like all the way up here. At this point, Harker's realized he is trapped. Essentially, he's trapped, and what he actually now believes is, well, this is where he's going to die.
Yeah.
He's trapped in this castle. He just went there as just a little solicitor to just go and dot some I's and cross some T's and help Dracula buy a nice house. It's really just about property and property law. And now he's going to die in a castle in Romania, and he's never going to see anyone he loves again. And he's writing this diary in the hope that someone's gonna find him. And so it does get up to 10. Then it then goes way back down, and when we jump to his wife, and we have the kind of the two, or wife to be, his fiance, we have the two narratives together, and she's like just hanging out with her friend Lucy. He's having a few issues with sleepwalking, and they're just chatting and taking the tea. And then because you've seen that it's been 10 in chapter 3, we're then going to be coming back, because you then get that literary irony that
Yeah.
here comes Dracula and they don't know that the danger's there too late. So I do think as well there is a playing. This isn't just, and we're going to keep this at 10 for the rest of it. It's like we need to get up here so that you can see why this is so dangerous, why we need to destroy the Count, and why this becomes a battle for the soul. And I also think that if I took all of this and kind of made it into a poem, we'd perhaps be more sensitive to the repetition of language, and that actually, rather than being oh dear, you just keep using the same word, it actually seems to be bringing in almost a stanza-esque quality to it and reminding you that this is pulling through. So, again, we have fury, fury, fury. Three furies, one per sentence, the classic. And I think that if I was seeing this as a poem, I'd probably be more accepting of that, because I'd understand that as a conscious decision. Whereas there seems to be something where we're assuming that this was a editorial mistake. But it is about the language and context, and this is the right context for this. And it does, it's great. It gives you this. The pacing's really good, the colors are really good. I've got this visualization, I've got this aesthetic. I'm in the moment, and there's a really clear sense of the characters as well coming through. And I love that, because you realize that another sensation swept through me. Another sensation, as you know, it's just that the Count's come in. It's so bizarre, because you're like, do I have a sensation when someone comes in a room? His eyes are closed. That other sensation is just that this, and again, we can go into the sort of the queer elements here that are coming through. But and I can understand now why you end up with, like, you can see why the Count ends up being such a more of a sexual or sensual figure in adaptations, because other people have read this and said, hey, we're going to make someone really hot play that guy later. We're going to make Jonathan Rhys-Meyers play him at some point.
But it's an entire passage about power, right? And like how power is wanted, not wanted, who wields it, when they wield it, how it's enacted, right? That first paragraph, all of the power is with those female vampires, but they're not doing anything yet, right? Like, it's the approach. Like, the approach is the thing, is where like the power lies, and he's just like, well, I'm powerless to you. Whereas that second paragraph, the entire power is in the Count's presence, his physicality, his body, his like aura, all of those things. The red light in his eyes was lurid, as if the flames of hellfire blazed behind them. Again, loads of alliteration there, right? He's like, flames, fire blazed behind. It's like, it's not hellfire, but it's like as if the flames were right there. Like, all of the Count's power is in his like very being, whereas the female vampires are using their like bodies, their like their wiles, right, to get him like the sensuality. But this is a different kind of bodily sensuality. It's a different realm at this point. So there's all these kind of like counterpoints, as you say, the different ways in which the body is indexing, like controlling
Body keeps the
whatever.
score. I also, again, I think one of the things we have to be conscious of is I suspect, and I can't prove this, but reading practice would have been different as well. So this is most likely unlikely to be a book that someone's going to sit down and devour in one go. So in some ways, the language that's being set up here then itself becomes a calling card throughout, so that you can understand what's happening later and how you're meant to be reacting to certain moments. So one of my little things I like to do, and I always tell my students, is when you've got a text like Dracula, it is usually easily available as a PDF or an online HTML format. And that's really useful for searching for words and just seeing where you see language repetition. And I do this quite a lot. And I wrote about this book in my thesis, and then in my monograph it comes up as an entire chapter. And the word voluptuous, very important, and it specifically comes up about female vampires. And the next time you see it repeated a lot is when it comes to after Lucy Westenra, who is one of the other key female characters. So she's a good little English lady. She becomes a vampire, and she then becomes voluptuous. And they actually talk about that transformation. So suddenly, and she's described as having voluptuous wantonness. Again, you're not just voluptuous, you've got voluptuous wantonness. And again, I think that's a way of saying she's beyond redemption now. I've already set up this language. You already know that this is the language of evil and the demonic and this aberrant sexuality, female sexuality. Well, boom, when I bring it back in, you're primed. And really importantly, you're primed because Lucy is going to be staked in a very brutal manner. And you're primed to be almost like, well, Harker didn't get that sort of justice at the time, so now we're going to do it to Lucy. We can't have Lucy be like these other women. And there's a lot there, I think, in terms of sort of post-colonial ways that we can look at it as well. It's just it's a great text. I think you can apply so many different theories to it. But yeah, again, it's worth saying that it does feel, again, Lucy's eyes will blaze. She's gonna blaze. She's gonna have all the things that we know mean vampire. So there's quite literally what's being created is a vampiric vocabulary, so that you're alert to it later.
That's great. And that's a really useful thing for listeners. If you've got an ebook version or a PDF version, search those words that stand out. Again, like if a word comes up multiple times, like the author is saying something, is doing something, right? Like, so it's never a mistake, but you want to think of what is happening there. What are they doing with it? That's a really good thing. Let me, if we can like hard transition to, do we know anything about like Stoker's writing, his like practice? Like, do we know anything about like the construction of this novel?
Yes. And we do, thanks to the fact that his notes were found. So, and you can access his notes. You can get them published. They've been compiled and they've been published with annotations. And so we can see his planning from chapter by chapter. We can also see the texts that he was reading to research. So that's incredibly useful. So we know that two texts that I found particularly significant in my research was The Land Beyond the Forest by Emily Gerard. And she was a British woman who was married to a gentleman in what was at that point the Serbian army. And they were based over in Romania. And she went over, and as many women of that time, she went around just talking to local people and compiling like what she saw as regional folklore and making notes about how people dressed. When you read it, it very much has the tone of a Victorian folklorist, which means that by the modern standards of folklore, and I have to reiterate this, that is not the current standards of good folklore practice. It is very much someone going in who is an outsider and writing about a community, and it has some really aspects there. So I'm always cautious that though I have read Emily Gerard's work, and I've also read Sabine Baring-Gould's work, The Book of Werewolves, another source for this novel, I read them as a text. I don't read them with the eyes of a folklorist. I read them as this is a source. So I don't I can comment to some degree about the limitations of it, but I'm not going to and fact check and Briere and Gould and Gerard. So we know that Sabine Baring-Gould's Book of Werewolves, it came out in 1865, and that it was definitely one of the texts that Stoker used. In particular, he used it for descriptions of how the Count looked. And he picked up different bits of sort of folklore, and I'm using that in a very broad sense, and he picked up little bits of information and tidbits to give texture, really. Stoker never actually visited Romania. So he was using Emily Gerard's Land Beyond the Forest, and most likely an excerpt from that was published in as a journal article, which had this section, and the bit that was published was the sort of sensationalist bit that was about vampires and werewolves. And superstition. So it's likely that he was using that bit and then could consult the wider text when it was published. And that kind of gives you the evocation of Romania. Things that might be of interest is that there isn't actually specifically any Dracula's castle. And again, that's because we can see from his notes that until reasonably late in the writing process, he was just called Count Vampyre or Vampyre. And then when Stoker was researching in Whitby, so this was a really long research process. This was over a number of years. He was based in London, working at the Lyceum and working with Henry Irving. And then he's moving around, and lots of different places across the British Isles are sort of claimed like this is where he took his inspiration from. And I'm sure to a certain degree it's all true. Texts are palimpsest. But yeah, so at one point, Stoker's up and he's in Whitby with his family, and he goes to a local library, which you absolutely should, and he is double checking some things about Romania. He's been reading other travel logs, and he comes across this woodcut engraving of Vlad the Impaler, Vlad Dracul, and that's where he gets Dracula from. So it isn't an absolute like for like, and it's not intended to be. And a lot of what has occurred since has very much been from like English speakers reading Dracula and then going off to Romania and being like, where's the vampires? And then the Romanians be like, what are you talking about? Like, where's Count Dracula? And they're like, you mean an important national hero? And we're like, no, like he's a vampire, right? Where's his castle? And so there's been lots of places now in Romania that will sort of give you the Dracula experience, because quite quickly people work out you can make money from that kind of tourism and Gothic tourism. But I think it is important to know that like, there is a lot of research, and it is very useful to see how Stoker creates this world using all these different sources.
Super fascinating, and the kind of collaging, right? Like again, we might think of the Gothic or the horror genre as, I don't know, as like trope heavy, right? Like they will become tropes, obviously, but even at this point, like these writers are kind of trafficking in different kinds of imagery and using them, but that there are these kind of historical bedrocks beneath it as well. I think it's useful when we're thinking about all kinds of fiction, all kinds of writing, that you can see some of those resonances in the close reading, right? We're like, oh, he's using these particular kinds of words or these particular kinds of bits of imagery, and like, where has that come from? Where have they picked that up from? So to have that long view as well from you, like that's really, really useful. Thank you for introducing us to that. Was there anything else you wanted to say about this passage or this extract of the book that we didn't talk about?
Nothing in particular. I would just say that like all of the further research I do comes from reading the text first.
Yeah.
So I read the text first, and then I slowly move my way back. And I think that's really important. And to say that I use that close reading, not simply when it comes to something like a fictional text, but I use it when it comes to his sources as well. And that's where you see these overlaps. And so each time what I'm relying on is that sensitivity to language and construction and tone and how we're getting an atmosphere, and how they come together. And again, the travel logs of the time, they were adventure narratives, really, even though they were intended to be non-fictional. They wanted to take you there in a time before you could go watch things on TV. So they were designed to be evocative and imaginative themselves. And I think that comes through as well. We see it because the very structure of the book kind of is a travelogue to a
Yeah.
certain degree.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think that's all I'd say about it. But hopefully that's been interesting.
Yeah, it's super interesting, and really nice just to go back to that. And I'm gonna have to reread it. I mean, I've got too many books on the list, but like reading some horror this month, like everyone go do it. Go read some scary books. I'm using horror and gothic wildly as interchangeable. Listeners, if you want to at me, you can do that. I don't really care.
No, at me. I've got, honestly, I've broadly.
Do
Yeah.
you have book recommendations for our listeners? Old things, new things, things you're currently reading, classics you want people to go back to?
So, I mean, I've got obviously tons and tons and tons. If you like vampires, I would highly recommend John Polidori's Vampyre from 1819, the text we forgot that came out of the Via Diodati. And I think that's a really interesting text in terms of how it uses focalization to talk about power and power dynamics. So that's worth, if you like close reading, paying attention to that. And I have written on that. And again, similarly using close reading. If you like werewolf texts and you want something that's a little bit off the beating track, I would say Clemens Hausmann's The Werewolf. Great news, both of these things are available online because they're outside of copyright, but Clemens Hausmann's The Werewolf is a beautifully written novella. It's very symbolic. It's set in some kind of broadly Scandinavian time that's a while back. That's as much as you're going to get from the text. But the descriptions of running are some of the most beautiful, and of the werewolf, who's a female werewolf, White Fell, running, are absolutely stunning. So I would highly recommend that. And then I would say I really like anything that's a little bit weird and wacky. And one of the weird and wacky, but not technically horror or gothic, that I read recently was called, I think it's called Shark Heart. Now my brain's going. By Emily Habeck or Harbeck. And I like sharks. I like shark horror. It's a speculative fiction text, and it's about a woman whose husband turns into a great white shark. And it is so beautiful and elegant and moving. And it is really about grief and what it is to lose someone to a debilitating long-term illness. And you can read it in as many ways as you need to read it. And it's just very, very moving. And I think it's exploration of the limits that your body will go to in caring and to love and to remain in a loving relationship as you lose someone in front of your eyes is excellent. And again, it's beautifully written. The way that it's written is sparse. It jumps around in terms of narrative. You also get the protagonist relationship with their mother as well. But yeah, the whole setup is it's a world where some people just have a gene where they turn into an animal, and they truly turn into that animal. So it isn't like they can talk to them. It is that they are there, but they are beyond the ability of our knowledge. And then finally, a text I absolutely love. It's now a film, which I haven't watched because I can't watch it, because what happens if it's not as good as the book and I'll cry. Night Bitch by Rachel Yoder. And it is, I guess, a werewolf text, only it's sort of a were-dog text. There's been a few, interestingly, I've noticed, of like women turning into dogs recently, as opposed to wolves. And I'm sure there's a whole research project I could do there. It is like reading something and going, that's what it's like to be a mum. It made me sweaty. It made me breathless. It made me feel desperate. It made me feel all the things you feel when it's 3 a.m. and your child won't sleep and you are dying, or you just have to pack the bag and get to the library for the reading time, and you know it's not a big deal, but for some reason you're sweating and this is the most important thing in the world, and everyone's judging you, and you know they are because you look wild. It was recommended to me and I read it in an evening, and I was just like, oh God, I feel seen in a way that I think literature is meant to make you feel. So yeah, I would highly, highly recommend it. I recommend it to all my mum friends. I was like, I'll put down the books about how to raise a happy baby. That's all nonsense. No one knows what they're doing. Read an angry book where someone rips a cat to shreds because it's just one more thing to care for. That's gonna, yeah.
I came to that book too late for my dog chapter of my current academic book, but there's way more to do, and I also haven't seen the film yet. But if I watch it, I'll let you know. It's a very good recommendation. And Kaja didn't recommend Red, White, and Royal Blue, which usually she recommends to anybody in the corridor of our workplace. So I'm just going to add that to the list because usually she shouts about it. I'm sure you all know what that book is anyway, listeners. But I was surprised you didn't say it.
Well, I was trying to be grown up and
Okay.
mature and sound like I'm an academic. But yeah, my God, if you haven't read Red, White, and Royal Blue, firstly, you're welcome. What a tonic to the modern world. It's just, I loved it. But also, I do think, interestingly, it does use like epistolary format in a really interesting way that I think in many ways draws on the earliest examples of novel writing. And I also think it uses the tendency now to write in present tense. And I know we malign it a lot, and it's very fan fictiony, but I like fan fiction, so I don't know what to. I can tell you my favorite fan fictions if you want, but I think actually as reading that, I was like, no, this is. I was persuaded that this is a new way of writing, and even if we don't like it, even if we find it a bit schlocky, even if we associate it with methods of writing that we denigrate, I was reading it and I was like, I'm so invested in this. I would say I had a similar sort of somatic experience reading it. Like I had to put the book down because I was like, I can't breathe. Like I'm really getting tense that I had when I was reading something like Night Bitch or when I was reading Dracula even for the first time. And so I think that appeals to the gothicist in me, where I want reading to be my whole body.
Yeah.
And I'll take me there. I will take your hand as an author and you can lead me wherever you want.
Thank you so much for your time today. I know you're super
No
busy.
worries.
I really, really appreciate it.
Oh, no, honestly, it's been such a pleasure. I've really, really enjoyed myself. It makes me remember why I love reading.
Amazing. Happy Halloween, everybody. Thank you for listening to this episode. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Leave a review and share with people you know. You can also follow the show and me on Instagram at Books Up Close and on YouTube. And if you can, please do fill out the feedback form linked in the show notes. It's really helpful to us. You can get show transcripts and more information by subscribing to the Substack. This show is made possible by an Impact Accelerator Award from the University of Hertfordshire and the Arts and Humanities Research Council.